Good afternoon, guys. This is another online tutorial for the Computer Apps Design 123 course. The topic of this video is creating the exploded axonometric or perspectival drawing. There will be three main parts to this tutorial. The first part is organizing your model layers for the groups of your exploded drawing. The second is how to create the drawing itself and set it up for your work in Illustrator. And the third is changing the line types in Illustrator to most effectively communicate your work. So first, before we go any farther, we're going to save it as a new file. Saving a new file is always a good habit to keep because in case your file corrupts or you lose it or you don't have it on the machine that you want it to be on, you can always go back and find a previous file that was saved recently. So I always make it a new habit to save a new file. You'll want to definitely do it for this, as we'll be modifying or changing your model in order to create the drawing. So go ahead and go up to File, Save As, and then all we're going to do is just the same name that you have, and then we're going to add exploded diagram underscore exploded diagram on the end of that, and then save it where you can find it. I have it on my desktop, so save. There we go. So now I've got a new file called Dowd Crash House Exploded Diagram. Very first step that we're going to be doing today will be organizing your model. Now, my file is basically already organized, but let me kind of explain how that works. So you'll need to go through your model layer by layer and divide it up into different categories. Now these categories are going to be the ones that you'll want to divide up and explode. And if you don't understand what that means, just keep watching the video and it'll make sense in just a moment. You should aim for 4 to 7 categories. Possible examples of these categories would be primary structure, secondary structure, facade, skin, roof, roof structure, interior details, interior walls, foundations, glass, windows, or just walls, etc. So you should be able to at least get 4 to 7 categories. If you think about it, almost every building will have windows, it'll have walls, possibly also interior walls, it'll have a foundation of some kind, and it'll have a roof of some kind as well. So there you go, that's 5 categories. So everyone should be able to at least create 5 different categories. So now I'll give you a moment to go through and change this. To change an object, if it's not on the right layer, I can select the objects, and I'm holding Shift and clicking. This allows me to select multiple objects. I know I don't want them on this green layer, which is the interior walls layer. I want it to actually be on the exterior layer. So I can go over to my exterior wall layer, I can right click on the layer, and I can say Change Object Layer. You'll see that the color of the object itself changes from green to blue, corresponding with the layers, green to blue. So once again, I'll just demonstrate that right here. Shift clicking on the objects, right clicking on the layer, change object layer. So that's how you convert the objects that you want from one layer to another. And I would just go through your entire model, cleaning it up as best you can, and reorganizing your objects into the, like I said, 4 to 7 categories. Alright, so take your time to sort through the entire model until you have it all subdivided. And once you have this done, you'll be ready for the next step. The next step, so part 2 of this video, is going to be setting up the drawing. So now it's time to start to position those layers, those categories that you just created, in an order that makes sense for your model and is clear and easy to understand in the exploded drawing. So, first things first, we're going to select some of the layers you just created. So for example, I'll start with this exterior layer since that's what we were just talking about. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to say select objects. As you can see, all those objects are selected. Now I have the gumball tool turned on, and that's on the bottom of your screen. This allows me to just click on the top arrow here and just drag it up. Just like that. Now let me show you something. So just in case I mess this up and I want to go back and reselect it, you'll see that it's kind of hard to make sure that I get just those panels that I want. So what I would encourage you guys to do, even if you have really good layer organization, is I would at this point group them. So once again, I'm selecting all the objects on this layer. I'm going to use the command group. So once I group them all together and I drag them up, to reselect it in the future, I can just click on one portion of it and it'll select all of the objects that I put into that group. This will make it much easier to shift the layers around, and this will be invaluable for you, and you'll see why in a moment. So I'm just going to keep going with this. I'm going to select the interior walls now, so select objects. Once again, I'm going to group. I'm going to drag it up. So now whenever I click on it, it'll grab them all. Group is such a good tool. So now for the third step, I'm going to grab my glass layers. So glass and glass. Once again, group. Drag it up. The group thing is so handy because it lets you easily adjust the position of those divided categories. So now I've got some interior objects, some doors, and some stairs left. I also have floors, structure, and foundation left. I'm going to select all my mullions, group them together. I'm going to pull those up. So now I'm left with just the structure and the interior objects and the floor plates. The last thing that I think I want to do is I want to select the foundation. I want to actually drag this guy down a little bit. So now already this is all getting kind of spread out and large. So in some of your cases, maybe it's best if you pull some of the walls out to the side for your diagram. So one way of doing this that I could do is I could take one of these groups, I could ungroup it, and I could deselect a portion of it. I could regroup it, that portion, and pull it off to the side. Pull it up. Select this portion again. Group it. Pull it off to the side and up. And now I can drag all three of these guys down. And now I'm set up for my Make 2D. Now, the step that we'll need to take before we do our Make 2D is to make sure that we know what type of drawing we're creating. So the assignment actually allows for two different sets. You can choose to do a perspectival or a scaled drawing. Both are acceptable for this assignment. So you might be thinking, what's the difference? If you remember, there's certain things that makes a drawing scalable or not, and is if the distance of the lines is consistent all the way through and doesn't pinch at the horizon point. So you know that renders aren't usually scalable. Usually renders are just perspectives, and perspectives are not scalable. Whereas in the case of our elevations, our plans, and our site plans, and our section drawings, those are all a 2D drawing, which means they don't have a vanishing point. They don't pinch. So you can actually make an axonometric is what it's called, or an isometric. Those are the scalable versions of this, or you can just make a perspectival. So I'll explain the difference, and then you can choose what you want to do. So in the case of scalable drawings, they're technically parallel projections. If you remember back to earlier lectures, the Monday night lectures that David gave, this means that they don't get smaller with changes in distance. So the farther away from you, it doesn't get smaller. The closer to you, it doesn't get larger. It stays the same throughout. It's similar to squares and rectangles, isometrics and axons, in that isometrics are axons, but axons aren't always isometrics. So if this was all confusing, don't worry about it. You can just do the perspectival view. But at this point, you need to decide which one you want to do. If you wanted to make an isometric drawing, just go up to the upper left-hand corner, do the drop-down menu for View, go to Set View, go to Isometric, and choose a view. I think I want to do Southeast is the one that I have set up right now. And this allows me to have a measurable drawing, a scalable drawing. In the case that you don't want to do this, you can just go to Set View, Perspective, You see how they look different? This has vanishing points, whereas the other one did not. In either case, whichever you choose, the next step that you need to do is name it. So I'm going to go to Panels, Named Views, and then I'm going to save this. I'm going to call it Exploded Diagram. Now I can scroll around and look at stuff, but I'll have this view saved for the future, so when I want to come exactly back to it, I can just double click on it. This is the perspectival version, and it's set up to go. If you want to do the ISO, you would set to the isometric like I showed you, and then you save the view just the same way. The next step that we're going to do is our Make 2D. Now at this point, you might want to move some stuff up a little or down if it overlaps too much. So just a little nudging here and there. This is another reason why the grouping becomes so invaluable. Once you have it set up and ready to go ahead and do your Make 2D. The options that you want to make sure you have selected are Group Output and Maintain Source Layers. If that's good to go, go ahead and hit OK. Now this might take a moment to generate. In the case of the more detailed models, it'll take even longer. So just give it a moment. You'll see over on this right-hand side, it's generated the layers that match the ones that I inputted into the Make 2D. And now we can go look at it. I'm going to flip over to the top view. Here's the drawing we created. Pretty good, pretty good. Obviously there's some lines that need to be cleaned up. But for the sake of today's drawing, I'd like to show you a few shortcuts that you can do in Rhino to help speed up this process. Make a new layer, go to the New Layer tab, up top, and type in, call this Boolean Curve. Now this will be extremely helpful for those who have framing and holes. And make sure you change your active layer to that layer we just made. So I move the check mark down by clicking on that row on the layer that I want. So the way this command works is I select the objects I want to use. I type curve boolean. So now it's resolving endpoints. It's going to let me select things in just a moment. So when you click somewhere, it creates a field. So Boolean's all about joining and separating things out. So what it does is it joins together a field with your lines. So if I click outside once, you'll see it's just created an outline that goes all the way around this drawing. Now it doesn't do everything that I want it to yet, but this is a super helpful thing. There's similar commands that does the same thing as this one thing that I just did, but this command can do so much more, and I'll show you. So I clicked once outside. You can keep clicking as you go throughout this. I know this is a space that I see through. I know this is a space that I see through. And I can go through my drawing this way, creating all these fields and regions that I know have depth and are open to behind. Now the reason why this is important is later on, when you go to create your line weights, you'll need to be able to judge how effective they are in displaying our profile rule. So two rules of line weights are profile and perspective. So the stuff that's closest to you is going to be darkest, and the stuff that's farthest away from you is going to be lightest. That's the perspective rule of line weighting. The profile rule is what I'm demonstrating right here, in that the lines that are outside, that are at the edge, are the ones that are the darkest and show the outline. So I'm going to skip ahead in the video right here. You'll get to see the work in just a moment, but I'm going to go through and select all of the regions that I want to have filled. So once you have that all concluded, this will be a really handy layer to go back in for line weighting once we get into Illustrator. Alright, last thing that we want to construct in Rhino are our leader lines. Now with this, it's super important to make another layer. So I'm going to make another layer here. Now I'll call this extension lines. You should probably call it leader lines. So now on this layer that I'm going to swap to, now we'll make it something that I can easily see. I'm just going to use the line tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to project these similar corners together. Just, you don't want too many, just a few. And then this will allow for the viewer to understand exactly what's going on here with everything. Actually, I think I'll go from the wall right here. Oh, I drew that from the wrong spot. So as you can see here, I just have a couple lines projecting out. And then one of them, I'm going to even actually do an extra step for, this guy right here. I'm going to want to trim him, so just do a trim command. Select cutting objects. It's going to be this line here. And then I'm going to get rid of that side of it, and then press enter. I should probably also cut it right here too, so I'm going to do another trim command. I'm going to select this line. See how awesome those perimeter lines are? So I'm going to trim out where it passes on the inside. Perfect. Alright. So now that we have our leader lines in place on a layer, we're ready to export. So the best way to do this is select it all, drag it over. Once again, I'm using the gumball tool. If you really want to see me collect all the fields using the curve boolean command, you can go ahead and go back in and watch through all those minutes. I'm joking. Please do not go back and watch. That would be such a waste of time. There's a reason why it's sped up. But I want you to understand it might take you a little while. I would be surprised if you had this many mullions to work with, but just a heads up. Once you're ready to go, go ahead and type in export. Now save it where you can find it. I'm going to save it on my desktop. We're saving it as an Illustrator file. We're going to call this exploded diagram. And if you want, you can tag on today's date if you'd like. So remember, this scale doesn't matter necessarily because it's a perspective drawing. We did the perspective route. We did not do the iso-axon route. So this scale here is just simply to reduce it down to the size of our page. It's still probably going to be way too big, but we'll see. So now go ahead and open up Illustrator. This is the step 3 of creating our axon, as I talked about in the beginning. I'm going to go to the desktop, exploded axon, open this guy up. If you're not sure what artboard size you have, you can go to View, and then Rulers, Show Rulers. If you right click on a ruler, it'll show you what unit you're in. We're in inches.
The size we want is a 16 by 24.
I could probably increase this by probably 200%. So if your thing came in too small, you can go to Object, Transform, Scale to 200%. So now this is closer to that 16. That size 16 by 24. Perfect. So now, like I always tell you, we're going to change a couple of things. We're going to change all our lines to be black. We're going to drop all our line weight down to 0.25. This is going to be our starting point to work from. Now we'll be ready to start our line weighting. The two major things that I'm going to show you in this video are going to be just the Boolean curve and the extension lines. So the Boolean curve, we can take that and we can pump that straight up to 1. And already, the line weighting that's happening here, most of it's already done for you. You can then go in and select the individual lines to make them smaller. I would also advise you to pull that outer line that wraps it all onto a new layer. And then that'll allow you to take the rest of your lines if you feel like they're too thick and drop them down a little bit. So with that one click, it just accomplished more line weighting than it would take you to do in like 2 hours. So that's why I'm a big fan of Boolean curve. Obviously, there's line weighting to do, and it's not finished yet, but this just sped up the process exponentially. The second thing that you'll want to do is select your extension lines. I'm currently in Essentials Classic, and so I have stroke open right here. I can change it to a dashed line. I'm not exactly sure what size you'll want, but for me, I'm thinking I'll go with 6. Six is going to allow you to have a dashed line that connects them all together, but still doesn't seem too present or abrasive, but definitely doesn't show up as part of your building. So at this point, what I would do next is I'd start line weighting it and going through and making sure that all the components were correct. And I'd spend a good hour or two doing that. So the last thing that we have to do on this project is to include our labels. And you'll want to be sure to label all the parts in your exploded diagram that you've pulled out. And so a good thing to do at this point is to reference back to your original Rhino model in case you forgot what some of those parts are called. I'm going to call this layer labels, and this will be what I'll be working off of. You can also set this up in Rhino if you so choose, but you'll want to be able to find a point, farthest point on your model, and you'll want to be able to use that as a reference point for where all your labels start at. So if I were to start to draw out some of my labels, I could draw a straight line across here. I think I want to put a guide at 14 inches. I think I said we were good to 16, so I'm going to make it 16. So at 16 inches is as far as my guides are going to go. So if you want to be fancy, you can make them have a curve to them, and this actually makes more sense. So just have a line project down.
Now, many people find it to be easier to create this in Rhino, but you can do it also in Illustrator like I'm showing here. You just have to make sure that the line projects directly from the component that you want it connecting to.
But what you'll want is you'll want all the lines projecting in a similar path. So keep most of the angles. Keep it create the angles of your lines to be a gradual U shape, so they should all be fanning out from the same direction. But once again, this is totally up to you. If you want to change it, go for it. So the last thing is you'll want to draw the second half of the line that projects out to 16 inches. Or whatever space you have provided on your board. So now I can go back, I can select all these lines. I'm actually going to call them label lines. And I can reduce the size of them down to 0.5. I can delete that line right there. I'm going to make another layer, call it labels. Labels text. And then you can choose to either have these labels applied in Illustrator, or you can choose to have them applied in InDesign. But the gist of what this will look like, I'm going to save it real quick. I'm going to go over to InDesign. I'm going to place it. And then this is what you have set up then. And now you're ready to apply your labels if you want to do them in InDesign. And you can go back and continue to line weight in Illustrator and then just update the drawing once you're done with it. I wish you guys the best of luck with your drawings. If you missed anything, feel free to go back and watch the video again. And if you have any questions, feel free to email and reach out. Rachel and I would love to answer your questions. Good luck, guys.